Steven didn't just humiliate Linda, he broke her down piece by piece. In front of others, he mocked her, punished her unfairly, and used his authority to make her feel small. Linda absorbed it all in silence. She cried when no one was watching, her hands shaking, her confidence slowly collapsing under the weight of constant humiliation. Each word from Steven cut deeper, leaving her feeling fragile, exposed, and alone inside a system that offered her no protection. Everything shifted the day Megan walked onto the base. She arrived as a sister, but what she witnessed stopped her cold. Steven publicly humiliating Linda, enjoying her pain. Megan didn't intervene with anger or nose. Instead, she locked eyes with him, and in that instant, Steven unknowingly sealed his own fate. Megan revealed who she truly was, and from that moment on, she and Linda began to move with purpose, patience, and precision. What followed was not a simple confrontation, but a calculated reckoning that would destroy Steven far beyond his expectations. But before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Now, let's understand how this story really began. The grinder radiated heat like a weapon. The black asphalt absorbed the California sun and threw it back upward in shimmering waves, distorting the air above Coronado's most infamous training ground. Salt still clung to the surface from the morning surf evolution, leaving a gritty film that chewed through exposed skin. The smell of brine, diesel, and sweat hung low, heavy in the lungs. Seaman recruit Linda Vance barely registered the temperature. Her body was locked in a deeper argument. Cold ocean water soaked her uniform to the skin, stealing heat from her core. While her muscles burned with lactic acid and exhaustion, her arms trembled in short, involuntary spasms as she fought to maintain the push-up position. Each breath came shallow, clipped, her rib cage hitching as if the air itself had weight. Sand had worked its way under her blouse, into her hairline, grinding against raw skin every time she moved. A shadow blocked the sun. Commander Steven Miller stood over her, boots planted wide, posture relaxed in the way only men with absolute authority could afford. The silver oak leaf on his collar caught the light when he shifted his head, flashing briefly rank made visible. His face was calm, almost bored, but one eyelid twitched faintly, a tell that surfaced only when he was enjoying himself. He wasn't watching her form. He wasn't counting repetitions, he was watching her break. Pathetic, Miller said, the word expelled with deliberate precision. His boot nudged Linda's shoulder, not hard enough to be written up, just enough to disrupt her bounce. You think because the Navy opened the pipeline to women, you suddenly belong here. Linda's jaw clenched, her fingers clawed against the asphalt, nails scraping for purchase. Her elbows shook, micro-failures stacking faster than she could correct them. You're weak, Vance, Miller continued, his voice pitched low, intimate, meant only for her. And weakness is contagious. You're a liability to the Trident. Her arms gave out. Her chest hit the ground, knocking the air from her lungs in a sharp, involuntary gasp. Heat scorched one side of her face, while cold water seeped through the fabric on the other. Tears escaped before she could stop them, streaking through salt and grit, leaving clean lines on dirty skin. She stared at the asphalt inches from her eyes, pulse hammering in her ears, heart rate spiking into the red. This wasn't failure. Failure was neutral, this was predation. Miller crouched, lowering himself until his mouth was close to her ear. His breath smelled faintly of coffee and mint. Ring the bell, he whispered. Go home to your dolls. Around them, the platoon stood frozen. No one met Linda's eyes. Some recruits fixed their gaze straight ahead, jaws locked so tightly the tendons stood out in their necks. Others stared at the ground, shoulders hunched, every instinct screaming to disappear. Drawing Miller's attention was a death sentence of its own. Linda's hand lifted, heavy as lead. The brass bell sat a few feet away, sunlight glinting off its polished surface, the symbol of relief, of surrender. Her fingers trembled as they reached toward it, the motion slow, mechanical, like a system running on emergency power. Then something shifted, a different shadow cut across the grinder, longer, sharper. Miller straightened, irritation flashing across his face. This presence wasn't part of the controlled chaos, it didn't fit the pattern. A woman leaned against a Humvee at the edge of the training ground, arms crossed over a civilian tactical jacket. Her stance was loose but deliberate, weight balanced, boots planted as if the asphalt belonged to her. Sunglasses concealed her eyes, but her stillness drew attention the way silence does after an explosion. It was unnatural, predatory. Miller's lips thinned. "Who the hell are you?" he snapped. "This is a restricted area." The woman pushed off the vehicle and walked forward. She didn't rush, she didn't hesitate. Each step landed with measured weight, boots striking the asphalt in a slow, even cadence. The sound carried, cutting through shouted commands and labored breathing until the grinder felt quiet. Recruits turned despite themselves. She stopped beside Linda and removed her sunglasses. Her eyes were flat, cold, fractured like glass after impact. She looked down at Linda first. Took in the shaking hands, the salt-streaked face, the belt just within reach. Then she lifted her gaze to Miller. "I'm the reason she hasn't quit yet," Megan said. Her voice was calm, unraised, controlled. It carried anyway. "And you're standing in my light, Commander." The heat on the grinder didn't change. But everything else did. Commander Miller laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't amused. It came out short and sharp, a bark expelled through clenched teeth, the kind of sound meant to reassert dominance. His shoulders rolled back as he stepped forward, closing the distance until he was well inside Megan's personal space. He used his height deliberately, chin angled down, chest squared, the posture of a man accustomed to watching people shrink. "Civilian," he said, enunciating the word as if it were an insult carved into stone. "Get off my base before I have the MPS throw you in a cell. Do you have any idea who I am?" His jaw tightened. "I run this selection." Megan didn't react. No flinch, no blink, not even a change in her breathing. Her pulse stayed, invisible beneath the fabric of her jacket. She simply shifted her weight slightly, the movement economical, and slipped one hand into her pocket. Miller's right hand moved before his conscious mind caught up. His fingers brushed the grip of his sidearm, muscle memory firing off a threat response triggered by speed and intent. His eyes flicked to her hand, pupils tightening. She didn't draw a weapon. She drew a black leather ID wallet and snapped it open with her thumb. The air changed. Inside wasn't a standard common access card, no barcode, no photo meant for scanners. What rested in the wallet was heavily redacted, text blocks blacked out, names replaced with clearance codes. At the top ran a gold clearance stripe, subtle, unmistakable. The kind issued to people whose names didn't appear on rosters and whose missions never made after-action reports. Miller's breath stalled in his chest. "Megan Vance," she said evenly, each word placed with precision. "Master Chief Special Warfare Operator." Attached to DevGru, the acronym landed like a body blow. For the first time since he'd stepped onto the grinder, color drained from Miller's face. His jaw slackened a fraction before snapping shut again. DevGru Naval Special Warfare Development Group, Tier 1, the unit that existed above doctrine and outside publicity. The operators briefed in closed rooms, their actions discussed only in classified compartments. Megan didn't stop there. "And Linda," she added, her eyes never leaving his, "is my sister." The silence stretched. Miller took a step back without realizing he'd done it. His heels scraped against the asphalt. The oak leaf on his collar suddenly felt heavier. His mind raced through what he knew, what little there was gleaned from redacted briefings and whispered reputations. Operators who didn't posture, who didn't threaten, who simply acted. "Master Chief," he said, the title forced out, brittle around the edges. His hand dropped away from his weapon. "Your sister is failing evolution standards. I'm just applying pressure." The tick in his left eye returned, sharper now. He straightened his posture, rebuilding his authority piece by piece. Megan broke eye contact. She looked down at Linda. Linda was still on the ground, propped on one elbow, staring up as if she wasn't sure what was real anymore. Her breathing was uneven, chest rising too fast, hands clenched tight enough to blanch her knuckles. Megan extended a hand. The gesture was simple, unceremonious. Linda hesitated for half a second, then took it. Megan pulled her up with effortless strength, stabilizing her before Linda's legs could give out. She brushed sand from Linda's shoulder, fingers precise, clinical, like a corpsman clearing debris from a wound. Linda's breathing slowed under her touch, instinct responding before thought. Only then did Megan turn back to Miller. She stepped close enough that he could hear her without anyone else needing to. "There's pressure, Commander," she said quietly. "And then there's sadism. I know the difference." Her eyes locked onto his, unblinking. "Carry on," she added. "But know this, I'm watching. And unlike these recruits, I don't follow your orders." She turned and walked away, boots striking the asphalt in that same measured rhythm, the grinder parting around her as if by instinct. Miller stood frozen for a beat too long, his jaw clenched hard enough to make the muscle jump. He couldn't touch her, he knew that now, but as his gaze slid back to Linda, something colder replaced the shock in his eyes. Calculation. The safe house was quiet in a way that pressed inward. The windows were blacked out, the exterior lights cut, the hum of the refrigerator the only mechanical sound in the room. A single lamp cast a low amber glow across the small living space, its light catching on the condensation of an ice pack as it melted slowly against Linda's ribs. She sat hunched on the couch, knees drawn in, shoulders rounded forward as if bracing for impact that never came. Her uniform blouse was gone, replaced by an old gray t-shirt that clung to damp skin. Purple and yellow bruising bloomed along her side, already mapping the damage beneath. She stared at the floor, jaw trembling, lips pressed together until the restraint failed. "I can't do it, Meg," the word slipped out thin and broken. Her shoulders shook, breath hitching in short, shallow pulls that never quite filled her lungs. She didn't look up. "He's right," Linda continued, voice cracking. "I'm not like you. I don't have that instinct, that switch." Her fingers tightened around the ice pack, knuckles whitening. "He fails me on inspections that are perfect. Changes my run times on the log. I watched him do it. He's going to wash me out tomorrow." Across the room, Megan stood at the small kitchenette, her movements stripped of ceremony. She filled the kettle, waited, pour. The smell of burnt coffee grounds cut through the sterile scent of antiseptic wipes and sweat. She carried 2 mugs back and sat across from her sister, posture relaxed but cold, like a weapon on safe. For a moment, she said nothing. "He's target fixated," Megan finally said. Her voice was low, even. She slid 1 mug across the table without looking at it. "That's a failure pattern. Miller isn't hunting performance, he's hunting validation." Her jaw tightened briefly, a muscle jumping near her cheek. "He climbed by politics and proximity, not by operating downrange. Men like that can't stand potential they didn't earn." Linda let out a sharp, broken laugh that turned into a sob. She dragged the heel of her hand across her face, smearing tears. "It doesn't matter, he's the commanding officer. His word is law on the logs, 1 signature and I'm down." Megan lifted her mug, the steam fogging her vision for a fraction of a second. She took a measured sip, eyes narrowing as if focusing on something only she could see. "Regulations are law," she said. "Not him." She set the mug down with deliberate care. "What he's doing violates Article 133, conduct unbecoming. Abuse of authority, falsification of records." Her fingers tapped once against the ceramic. "But reporting him through normal channels is a dead end. Taper disappears, witnesses reassign, careers die quietly." Linda's breathing slowed, just slightly, as she listened. Her eyes flicked up, searching Megan's face. "We don't report him," Megan continued. "We expose him." She leaned forward and reached into her bag, pulling out a folded tactical map of the base. The paper made a soft crackle as it opened on the table, red grease pencil marks already laid out, routes, blind spots, observation points. Linda's gaze dropped to it, curiosity cutting through despair. "Miller thinks you're weak," Megan said. "He thinks you're isolated. He thinks you will break." Her eyes lifted to meet Linda's, sharp hands steady. "We let him believe that." Linda swallowed. Her throat worked visibly. "You want me to, what?" "You don't quit," Megan said. "You don't fight him. You hold the line." Her mouth curved, not into a smile, but into something colder. "We use his arrogance against him." Linda wiped her eyes again, slower this time. "Bait for what?" Megan's expression hardened, the warmth draining away until only focus remained. "For the biggest mistake of his career." The next 3 days stripped illusion from endurance and replaced it with control. The living room of the safe house became a rehearsal space, furniture pushed back, curtains drawn tight. Megan didn't count repetitions or correct posture. She corrected pauses, she corrected breath. She corrected the space between impulse and response. "Again," she said quietly. Linda stood barefoot on the carpet, shoulders squared but relaxed, hands resting open at her sides. Megan circled her like an evaluator, eyes tracking minute shifts in posture. When he screams, "Don't disassociate," Megan said, thumb clicking the stopwatch. "That's what he wants. That's when you vanish." She stepped into Linda's space abruptly. "Stay present. Analyze him." Linda's jaw tightened. Her breath stuttered once, then settled as she forced it down into her diaphragm. "Watch his hands," Megan continued. "See how his fingers curl before he insults you. That's anticipation. He's rehearsed it." She leaned closer, her voice low. "Does he glance left, right? He's checking his audience. He's performing. Linda, he's an actor." They practiced eye contact steady, respectful, never defiant. Megan corrected the angle of Linda's chin by millimeters, adjusted her stance until it projected compliance without collapse. They drilled responses until they were automatic, stripped of emotion. On base, the shift was almost invisible. The grinder looked the same. The ocean was just as cold. The instructors just as loud. But when Miller descended on Linda during surf torture, his voice tearing through the wind, something failed to land. Linda's face remained set, no tears cut through the salt on her cheeks. Her shoulders didn't curl inward. When he screamed inches from her face, spittle flying, she snapped back. "Huia, Commander," crisp and mechanical, volume exact, cadence flawless. Miller paused. It was brief, a half-second hitch, but it was there. His left eye twitched. He straightened, nostrils flaring, recalibrating. The pressure escalated. During boat crew evolutions, he ordered the others to stand down, while Linda alone bore the weight. The id slammed onto her helmet, fiberglass biting into her scalp. Her knees shook, quadriceps screaming as lactic acid flooded her legs. Sweat poured into her eyes, blurring the world to a narrow tunnel of pain. She didn't drop it. Her breathing stayed measured, teeth clenched just enough to keep control. Later, he sent her into the sand. "Sugar cookies," he called out, voice thick with satisfaction. She rolled until the wet grit abraded skin raw, sand embedding into open pores, salt water turning every movement into a burn. When she stood, blood traced thin lines down her forearms where the skin had split. She didn't look at him, she waited for the next command. From beyond the perimeter fence, Megan watched through high-power optics, the image stabilized and sharp. She logged timestamps, recorded audio, captured angles that showed isolation, duration, deviation from protocol. Her face remained still, but her jaw set harder with each violation. This wasn't observation, it was evidence collection. She needed more than cruelty, she needed intent. A moment where safety doctrine was breached so clearly couldn't be reframed as hard training. Her eyes tracked the training schedule, already memorized. Hell Week was coming, and Miller would not be able to help himself. The breakout simulation was designed to fracture certainty. 48 hours without meaningful rest, rotating contact scenarios, live fire integrated with breaching charges and controlled detonations. The instructors called it stress inoculation. In the margins of the safety manual, it was listed as one of the highest risk evolutions in the pipeline. Confusion was intentional. Fatigue was the point. Mistakes were expected. Accidents were supposed to be impossible. Before dawn, the base lay in a half-sleeping stillness broken only by distant generators and the low murmur of surf. Behind the mess hall, shadows pooled between concrete walls, the air cold enough to sting exposed skin. Megan stood with her collar up, posture casual, eyes constantly moving. Linda approached at a jog, breath fogging faintly, boots scuffing gravel as she slowed. Megan didn't waste words. She pressed a small object into Linda's palm, flat, circular, no larger than a uniform button. It felt warm despite the cold. "Inside your vest," Megan said quietly. Near the trauma plate, left side, Linda turned it over with her thumb, pulse visible at her throat. "What is it?" "A transmitter," Megan replied. "Encrypted, audio and biometrics, heart rate, respiration, motion variance. It pushes to my cloud server in real time." Linda slid it into her vest, fingers brushing the ceramic plate beneath. Her hand lingered there for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. "He's going to try to hurt me for real this time," she said. It wasn't a question. Her voice wavered just enough to betray the effort it took to keep it steady. Megan watched her closely. The tension showed not in Linda's words, but in the way her shoulders lifted a millimeter to high with each breath. "He's going to try to break you," Megan corrected. He wants you to door. Voluntary attrition looks clean on paper. Her eyes hardened. He'll separate you from your squad. That violates live fire safety protocol. When he does, you don't resist, you don't provoke. You let him talk. Linda swallowed, her jaw tightened, then relaxed as she forced it to unlock. Let him say everything. Megan continued. Every threat, every justification. He won't be able to help himself. Linda nodded once. Fear and resolve collided behind her eyes, neither willing to yield. And then, Megan checked her watch. The luminous dial glowed pale green in the dark. And then, she said, I introduce him to the chain of command. The siren cut through the air minutes later, sharp and unforgiving. The simulation began with concussive force. Breaching charges thundered through the mock village, shockwaves rattling windows and teeth alike. Smoke bloomed thick and white, swallowing sight lines, turning familiar structures into shifting silhouettes. Live rounds cracked overhead, the sound snapping close enough to feel. Linda moved with her squad, muscle memory overriding exhaustion. Commands were shouted, relay, acknowledged. She kept pace, heart rate climbing, each breath feeding oxygen to burning limbs. Then it happened. Amid the chaos, Miller's signal came, an abrupt hand motion directing the squad to flank right. As they moved, his grip clamped onto Linda's vest. The force yanked her backward, spinning her off balance. Her boots skidded as he dragged her into the shadow of a concrete wall, the nose of the fight dropping away behind them. The blind spot swallowed them whole. The alley was a narrow wound cut between concrete structures, its walls slick with condensation and soot. Smoke clung low, turning the air granular, every breath scraping the throat raw. The sounds of the simulation gunfire, shouted commands, controlled detonations fell away behind the wall, replaced by heavy, suffocating quiet broken only by Linda's breathing. Miller shoved her forward. Her back struck the concrete with a dull, hollow impact that rattled her teeth. The ceramic trauma plate under her vest absorbed part of it, but the shock still rippled through her ribs. Her helmet knocked the wall, vision flashing white for half a second before snapping back into focus. Miller stepped in close, crowding the space until there was nowhere to retreat. His face was inches from hers, eyes bright, pupils tight. A bead of sweat ran from his temple into his eyebrow. Disappear. His jaw worked once, grinding. You think your sister can save you? He hissed. His hand moved to his rifle. The sound was unmistakable, the sharp, mechanical click as he disengaged the safety. It cut through the smoke like a blade. He lowered the muzzle deliberately, pointing it at the ground near her boots. The barrel hovered there, steady, controlled. I control this environment, he said softly. I write the narrative. His mouth twitched, a faint smile trying to break through discipline. I could say you panicked. I could say you flagged me. He leaned closer, breath hot against her cheek. I could discharge this weapon next to your head and rupture both eardrums. Temporary threshold shift, maybe permanent, and no one would question me. Linda's vision tunneled. Her pulse hammered against her throat, each beat a physical blow. Her heart rate spiked hard and fast, the transmitter beneath her vest registering the surge instantly. Somewhere far away, a monitor lit up red. She didn't move. Her fingers curled slowly against the concrete, grit biting into skin. She forced her breathing down, short inhales through her nose, controlled exhales through clenched teeth. Megan's voice echoed in her head, not loud, not urgent, precise, stay present. Linda lifted her chin a fraction, just enough to meet his eyes. Is that a threat, Commander? She asked. The words came out level, not defiant, not pleading. Miller blinked, surprised despite himself. The tick at the corner of his eye flared, then stilled. His smile sharpened. That's a promise, he said. Drop your gear. Quit, right now. His grip tightened on the rifle. Or I make sure you leave here on a medical discharge that follows you for the rest of your life. For a split second, satisfaction flickered across his face. He was saying it all out loud now. Every justification, every intent. Then he moved. The kick came low and fast, driven by the hip. His boot slammed into the side of Linda's knee with brutal precision. There was a sound, wet, sharp, raw, a pop that echoed off the concrete. Pain detonated up her leg, blinding, total. Her scream tore out of her before she could stop it, raw and uncontrolled. Her leg collapsed beneath her, the joint refusing to hold. She hit the ground hard, hands scraping against the alley floor as she tried and failed to brace herself. Her vision swam, the world narrowed to white-hot agony radiating from her knee, nausea curling in her gut. Miller loomed over her, blocking what little light filtered through the smoke. He smiled down at her, relaxed now, victory settling into his posture. "Oops," he said lightly. "Training accident." He crouched, close enough that she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the calm in them now that he believed it was over. "Looks like you're done, Vance." He reached for her radio, fingers already curling around the handset to call it in. To control the aftermath, to write the report. He didn't see the red lead blinking steadily beneath the fabric of her vest. Miller's radio crackled once, a sharp burst of static that pulled his attention away from the injured woman at his feet. His fingers tightened reflexively around the handset. He expected the clipped cadence of a range safety officer, maybe a call to freeze the lane, paperwork already forming in his mind. Instead, the sound that followed didn't come through the radio at all. It came from everywhere. "I could discharge this weapon right next to your head. That's a promise." The voice rolled across the training compound, amplified and distorted just enough to make it unmistakable. Miller's own words, his own tone, projected through the public address system that covered the grinder, the ranges, the mock village, every inch of the facility. Miller went still, the color drained from his face in a slow, creeping wave. His mouth opened, then closed again. A fine tremor ran through his hands as the realization landed. Recruits froze mid-movement, heads snapping up. Instructors halted commands, eyes darting toward the speakers mounted on poles and buildings. Conversations died where they stood. The recording continued for a half-second longer, just enough to leave no doubt. Then the sirens began, not the familiar wail used for simulated casualties or lane resets. These were sharp, insistent, layered with urgency. Military police emergency klaxons, the kind reserved for real-world breaches. Miller's rifle slipped from his grip and clattered against the concrete. He didn't bend to retrieve it. His chest rose and fell to fast, breath catching high in his throat as he looked around, searching for an exit that no longer existed. The roar of an engine cut through the smoke. A black SUV burst through the perimeter of the mock village, splintering a wooden barricade as if it weren't there. It fishtailed briefly before straightening, tires screaming as it came to a violent stop less than 10 feet from Miller. The driver's door swung open. Megan stepped out. She wasn't wearing civilian gear anymore. She was in full dress uniform, pressed sharp enough to cut. Ribbons lined her chest in dense, orderly rows, like catching on metal. The Navy Cross sat among them, unmistakable. Her posture was rigid, composed, every movement economical. Her face was calm in a way that felt lethal. Behind her, 2 MPs moved with practiced efficiency, hands already near restraints. A rear admiral followed, expression carved from stone, eyes locking onto Miller with cold precision. Miller's knees threatened to give. He raised his hands slowly, palms out, fingers shaking despite his effort to still them. "Admiral," he stammered. His voice cracked, then steadied artificially. This is a misunderstanding." It was a stress test. The Admiral didn't respond. Megan walked past him without a glance, boots striking the concrete in measured steps. She stopped directly in front of Miller. He tried to meet her eyes and failed, gaze dropping to the ribbons instead. She reached out and tore the Velcro name patch from his uniform in one clean motion. The ripping sound echoed in the sudden silence, louder than any shout. "You are relieved, Mr. Miller," she said. Her voice was flat, final. The words hung in the air as the sirens continued to wail, sealing his fate. The Admiral's office felt airless, sealed by thick walls and a closed door that muted the bass beyond it. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, steady and unforgiving. Miller sat rigid in a straight-backed chair, his duty belt gone, sidearm confiscated, the empty loops at his waist glaring evidence of how quickly authority could be stripped. A vein pulsed at his temple, betraying the control he was trying to project. His fingers flexed once, then clenched against his thighs, knuckles whitening. Across the room, Megan stood at attention. Her posture was immaculate, heels aligned, shoulders square, chin level. The ribbons on her chest caught the light with every shallow breath she took, the Navy Cross resting there without ceremony. Her face was composed, but a slight tightening at the corner of her jaw hinted at the effort required to maintain that stillness. She hadn't moved since entering the room. The Rear Admiral remained behind his desk, tablet resting flat before him. He didn't raise his voice when he spoke. He didn't need to. "The audio is clear," he said, tapping the screen once. The recorded waveform froze, a visual autopsy of Miller's own words. Premeditated assault, maltreatment of a subordinate. Threatening with a deadly weapon. Miller's composure fractured. He lurched forward in the chair, restraints biting into his wrists. "She's weak," he barked, spittle gathering at the corner of his mouth. His eyes darted toward Megan, then away, as if looking directly at her might finish him. "I was weeding out the weak. That's my job. Her sister is interfering with seal selection. This is contamination of the pipeline." Megan turned toward him with deliberate slowness. The movement was controlled, almost ceremonial, as if she were pivoting on a parade deck. Her eyes met his, steady and unreadable. When she spoke, her voice was level, stripped of emotion, sharper for it. "Twist number 1. Miller," she said, "I didn't interfere as a sister." A pause just long enough for the words to land. "I was assigned here 3 weeks ago as an undercover auditor for Naval Special Warfare Command. High attrition rates, repeated injuries during evaluation phases. Patterns that didn't align with doctrine or medical probability." Miller's mouth fell open. The color drained from his face, leaving a mottled gray beneath the harsh lighting. You were the auditor." The question came out thin, almost childlike. "My sister didn't know," Megan continued, her gaze never wavering. "You didn't know." Her hands remained still at her sides, fingers relaxed. "She was just the variable that proved your corruption. You failed the test, Stephen. Not her." The Admiral inclined his head once, the decision already rendered. He pressed a button on his desk. The door opened, and the 2 military police stepped forward. "Remove him," the Admiral said. "Court-martial proceedings begin immediately." As the MPS hauled Miller to his feet, his chair scraped loudly against the floor. He twisted once, fighting the grip, then went still. His eyes locked onto Megan, burning with something raw and unfiltered. Hatred, fear, disbelief. He tried to speak, but the words never came. The door closed behind him with a final, hollow thud. Silence reclaimed the room. Megan exhaled slowly through her nose. Only then did she lower her gaze, reaching into the pocket of her dress uniform. Her phone vibrated once in her hand. She read the message without changing expression. "Knee is stable. Just a dislocation. I'm not quitting." For a fraction of a second, something softened behind Megan's eyes. Not relief. Relief was a luxury, but resolve, hard and unbreakable. She slipped the phone away and returned to attention, spine straight, eyes forward, as if already preparing for the next fight. 3 months later, the parade ground shimmered under a pale morning sun. Heat rose off the concrete in faint waves, distorting the straight lines of boots and shadows. The recovering recruits stood in formation, shoulders squared, chins lifted, bodies aligned by habit even where strength was still being rebuilt. The cadence of controlled breathing moved through the ranks like a silent metronome. Linda stood among them with a rigid orthopedic brace locked around her knee. The carbon fiber frame caught the light when she shifted her weight, the hinge whispering softly with the adjustment. Her jaw was set, lips pressed into a thin line as she ignored the dull, persistent take radiating up her leg. She wasn't graduating today. The medical review board had rolled her back 1 class cycle standard protocol after a documented joint dislocation, but she was upright, information still present. Her hands remained steady at her sides, fingers relaxed despite the effort it took to keep them that way. At the podium, the new commanding officer read from prepared remarks. His voice carried across the field, formal and measured, words about resilience, standards, and the unforgiving nature of the profession. The speech flowed over the formation, absorbed without visible reaction. This wasn't ceremony for emotion, it was acknowledgement of endurance. Near the back of the crowd, beyond the last rank, Megan stood apart. She was back in civilian clothes, dark jacket, neutral lines, nothing that drew attention. Sunglasses hid her eyes, but not the stillness of her posture. Her hands rested loosely in her pockets. She watched Linda, tracking the subtle signs most people would miss. The controlled exhale before weight shifted, the fraction of a second longer it took to straighten. After standing at ease, Megan didn't move. She didn't need to. Footsteps approached on the concrete behind her, sharp and deliberate. Megan didn't turn. A man in a tailored suit stopped at her side, his presence announced by the faint scent of expensive cologne and confidence. He angled his body just enough to invade her space, without touching it. "Ms. Vance," he said, voice smooth, carrying the practiced ease of someone accustomed to courtrooms. The corner of his mouth lifted. "I represent Commander Miller's defense team." His eyes flicked toward the formation, then back to her. "We're going to challenge the recording. You operated without a warrant. Chain of custody is compromised. It's inadmissible." Miller walks. Megan's lips curved upward. The smile was small, precise, devoid of warmth. It didn't reach her cheeks. She turned her head slowly, just enough for him to see it fully. "That brings us to the final twist," she said quietly. She removed one hand from her pocket and held out a single sheet of paper. No flourish, no hesitation. The lawyer took it, still smirking, and began to read. His expression changed in increments. First confusion, his brow creased, eyes narrowing as he scanned the header. Then calculation, pupils flicking back and forth faster. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. Color drained from his face until the smugness collapsed into something brittle and pale. Title 50 Authority. His fingers tightened on the paper, creasing it. He swallowed once, the movement visible in his throat. Title 50 didn't mean suppression. It meant classification, intelligence oversight. A parallel legal universe where warrants weren't required in the way he understood them, and where proceedings didn't play out under lights and cameras. He's never getting out, is he?" he asked, the question barely audible now. Megan slid her sunglasses back into place, masking her eyes completely. "He targeted a teammate," she said. Her voice was even, uninflected. "He's lucky he's only going to prison." The lawyer stood frozen as she stepped away, the paper trembling slightly in his hand. On the field, the commanding officer called the formation to attention. Boots snapped together in perfect unison. Linda straightened, pain flaring briefly before being locked down. "I discipline." Her gaze remained forward. Megan stopped at the edge of the concrete, turned once more toward the formation, then walked on. Already gone, already a ghost again. The sun sank low over the Pacific, bleeding orange and steel blue across the horizon. The wind carried salt and cold off the water, cutting through the quiet between the barracks and the shoreline. Linda emerged from the building slowly, one step measured, the next deliberate. The brace was gone now, but the injury still lived in her gait, a faint hitch she refused to hide or exaggerate. Her shoulders were back, her chin stayed level. Whatever had once made her look breakable had been burned away. Megan waited near the edge of the sand, boots planted just above the high tide line. She stood with her hands behind her back, fingers interlaced, eyes fixed on the water. The ocean moved without apology, wave after wave collapsing into white foam and retreating as if nothing could mark it. Linda stopped beside her, breathing in through her nose, out through her mouth. The rhythm was controlled, practiced. "I heard Miller took a plea deal," she said, eyes locked on the horizon. "He did," Megan replied without turning. Her jaw tightened for a fraction, was second before settling again. "He's history." Silence stretched, a gull cried somewhere overhead, sharp and lonely. Linda shifted her weight, the sand compressing under her boot. Her hands curled once, then relaxed. "You used me, Meg," she said. Her voice didn't rise, it didn't shake. But her eyes finally left the ocean and found her sister. "You knew he would come after me." Megan turned then, fully. The wind tugged at her hair, exposing the tension at the corner of her eyes, the faint line between her brows that only appeared when she stopped guarding herself. She didn't answer right away. She looked at Linda the way she had once looked at maps before a mission assessing terrain, damage, survivability. "I did," Megan said. The admission landed clean, without apology. "I needed to know if you could take the heat. Not the physical heat any idiot can grind through push-ups and pain. I needed to know if you could handle the injustice." Her voice dropped, roughened slightly, "because that's what the job is. Orders that don't make sense, authority that abuses itself. Knowing the line and holding it when someone tries to shove you past it." Linda's throat worked, she didn't look away. Megan reached into her jacket pocket, the motion was small, but deliberate. She drew out the trident gold, catching the last light of the sun. The eagle, anchor, and flintlock rested heavy in her palm, worn smooth at the edges by years of skin and sweat. She closed the distance between them and pressed it into Linda's hand. "You haven't earned the Navy's trident yet," Megan said. Her voice fractured, just slightly, before she locked it down again. "But you earned mine. You stood your ground." Linda's fingers closed around the metal. Her fist trembled once before tightening. Tears spilled down her cheeks, silent, unashamed. Her shoulders didn't collapse, her knees didn't bend. This wasn't weakness leaving her, it was something else settling in. "I'll earn my own," Linda whispered, the words sharp with resolve. She pushed the pin back into Megan's palm. "Keep this for me until I do." Megan's mouth curved, slow and genuine. She slipped an arm around her sister's shoulders, pulling her close. Linda leaned in without hesitation. Together, they faced the ocean as the sun finally disappeared, the sky darkening into deep blue. Two warriors stood there, one forged by years of fire and silence, the other just beginning to burn. "Teal," Megan said, "if you want to see what comes next, subscribe to the channel and stay with us."